The purpose of this video is mostly ranting. Feel free to rant along in the comments. Quick note, usually I use the word film, however in this video I am going to use the word movie too. Greetings, my name is Nina, welcome back to my channel. Today is June 6, 2024, as I am filming this video. A few weeks ago, the world has heard some interesting news surrounding Middle-earth. According to the news, the movie about Gollum is in works. As far as I know, this is going to be a two-part film with Gollum as the main character. This news sparked some thoughts in my head and I decided to share them here. After all, one of the reasons that I created this channel is to share my thoughts about various different topics, particularly regarding books, music, and sometimes films. Maybe these thoughts resonate with you, or maybe they open another perspective to you. I'm going to do this. What do I think about the Gollum movie? Gonna be completely honest with you, ladies and gentlemen, I'm not excited about it at all. And in fact, on its own, the film doesn't interest me in the slightest. Now, you might be thinking, but if you aren't interested in the movie, why are you making this video? What's the point? First of all, I wanted to vent and to express my thoughts. Second, sure, on its own the film doesn't interest me, however I am interested in this Gollum movie as a phenomenon. A series of modern tendencies, or so to speak. To be honest, I do not find these tendencies to be very good, and for a good reason. I do have to admit that the very first and fundamental reason I have no interest in the Gollum movie is that I have lost my interest in movies in general. Yeah, I used to be such a movie girl. I grew up watching lots of various films and TV shows and animated films and so on. My first school in Moscow was located on the opposite side of the film theater. I actually looked to the left to see the posters of the films. Yes, I was interested in what was going in the cinema. Yeah, back in the day, I used to watch a lot of movies, I'd memorize them, the actors, find out behind the scenes stuff, etc. Nowadays, I wouldn't name a film to you, or who directed it, or who starred in it, and who even the main character is. I don't even remember his name or her name. Granted, just like in the old days, I still follow some entertainment news, because why not? I do have some basic pop culture knowledge. Well, some against my will. Nowadays, I'd rather watch YouTube or TikTok, or listen to a podcast, or music, or read a book, or go out. In short, I'd rather do any activity other than watch the films. I feel like movies are not for me anymore, especially the ones that came in 2020s. And no, this has nothing to do with attention span. I think this is because most YouTubers and TikTokers feel more down to earth, therefore more interesting to watch. Well, most of them. While movies are way too larger than life, too glamorous, don't get me wrong, there's nothing wrong with movies being larger than life. That's actually part of the charm, well, at least in the case of most films. And this statement of mine doesn't mean that I will never watch a movie again. I think I watched way too many larger than life movies and now I want something more reserved and comforting. Kinda ironic that I use the word comforting here, when Lord of the Rings films are one of the most comforting films ever made. Yeah, I literally googled comfort movies and Lord of the Rings was one of the first films that came there in the list. Second reason I'm not interested in the Gollum film is because we already have a Gollum film, yeah! The Hunt for Gollum is a 2009 fan-made film that was uploaded on YouTube and did not have a theatrical release. And the main character of the film isn't Gollum, it's Aragorn. So basically this whole 40-minute film is about Aragorn hunting down Gollum. Unfortunately, I do not remember the film that well, However, I do remember very well one thing. I can definitely tell you that the visuals from a short fan-made film from 2009 look so much better than the visuals from a billion-dollar Amazon TV show that came out in 2022, not that long ago. Speaking of Rings of Power, there is a certain aspect of the show that I do want to address, and I have a certain belief regarding that aspect. I'm going to do that later. In overall, I'd rather not speak of the show at all. Not in this video, at least. Third and final reason I have no interest in Gollum movie on its own is that Tolkien already gave us stronger stories to make films and TV shows from than a passage briefly mentioned in Fellowship of the Ring book. Not that the story of Aragorn hunting down Gollum is bad. No, that's not the case. It's just not the story that should be a two-part movie. Yeah, it worked well for a 40-minute fan film, but 2 movies about the hunt for Gollum? I don't think so. I am sure upon hearing the news about the Gollum movie, you thought, oh, they are milking Lord of the Rings. This is kinda true, just like with most franchises these days. However, there is one thing that separates Lord of the Rings from other franchises. The fact that Tolkien has provided the fans with enough source material to make films and TV shows from. You don't need a full Silmarillion show. You can take a separate story about certain characters, hire the right people, and there you have it. Now, you might have mentioned the word copyright here, and you wouldn't be wrong. However, in this video, let's imagine that copyright issues aren't the problem. Let's imagine for a while that you can't see any Tolkien story turned into a film or show. In this case, I would definitely love to see The Children of Húrin to be adapted for the screen. You could briefly mention the backstory of Morgoth and Húrin, and then focus on Túrin and Nienor. Since the story is very dark and gloomy, I would adopt a grey color spectrum. Yeah, color spectrum does really matter in a film. This could be a movie about loss, anger, and betrayal. And what's most important, you could make Thorin's story ambiguous so the viewer could think whether he was doomed because of Morgoth or because of his own actions. I would leave that open for interpretation. Yeah, I know The Children of Húrin isn't the most hopeful story that Tolkien wrote. Lord of the Rings is hopeful and comforting, while Children of Húrin, not so much. However, that's the story that can definitely stand on its own. And if you want something more hopeful and positive, you have Beren and Luthien. To be honest, it would be really cool to see Tevildo, the Prince of Cats, as the main villain. And just like with The Children of Húrin, you could select the correct color spectrum, the correct tone, and everything. You could add a short backstory and then focus on the main characters. Let their actions shape the story and make the characters stand out. Beren and Luthien are total opposite of Children of Húrin. However, the story can also stand out on its own, and neither of the stories would need to be reliant on Lord of the Rings. Speaking of being reliant on Lord of the Rings, here is where a larger problem lies in general. Even without the copyright or budget issues, all the sequels, prequels, spin-offs, midquels, and whatnot, they all heavily rely on the original work for various different reasons, either for visuals or plot points or references or characters or the makers of the original work or whatever. I guess it's easier to bandwagon the original work rather than to come up with new ideas. My point here is that adapting Tolkien stories for the screen in general, fundamentally, is a good idea. Yeah, Tolkien has left a lot of source material behind. Oh, and yeah, we should be thankful to Christopher Tolkien, his son, for editing and publishing all of these works. But here's one question. Did Tolkien rely heavily on Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit to the point that he couldn't make stories that would stand out on their own? No! I'd tell you more. Lord of the Rings is a direct sequel to The Hobbit, and it can be read as a standalone work. You could read one without reading the other. If Tolkien himself focused on actual storytelling and not on the blatant bandwagoning, I do not see the reasons why the filmmakers should not do the same. Yeah, this is a very sad tendency that I did notice with films these days. Maybe that's one of the reasons I do not watch them that much anymore. The sequels and the secondary works, let's call them that, all the sequels, prequels, secondary work, let's call them that, because I'm too lazy to list them all. They are subordinate, bland, and forgettable. And sometimes they blatantly copy the original work, but without the charm that the original had. Well, the only positive thing that I do have to say about all of these secondary work, one positive thing that I can say is that they provide YouTubers with great content to make. Yes, in this decade I watch a lot of bookish content, but before that, I used to watch a lot of movie reviews. I used to watch Nostalgia Critic, yes, and some other movie reviewers too. When Rings of Power came out, the reviews of the show, they found me. I got curious and I watched them. I liked watching them and then I forgot about them. In general, I just find bookish content to be more comforting and fulfilling. But recently a few things happened and suddenly I had the urge to watch Rings of Power reviews again and also find some new ones. I'm gonna be honest with you now, I have to thank the YouTubers. I really didn't know that I needed a good laugh. Yes, I watched all of these reviews and I laughed a lot because they were incredibly funny. I heard that season 2 is coming out this summer and that's great! More content for YouTubers! And for my amusement. Yes, I said I'd rather not mention the show, however, I have no problem mentioning the reviews of the show. Why not? They're fun. And after watching a lot of reviews, I can definitely tell you that people in general tend to focus on the wrong things. And now finally came that one aspect of the show that I really want to address. In its core lies the word copy-paste, if you know what I mean. But before I do that, I want to mention a certain cliché that is prevalent with certain works, particularly the Sherlock Holmes novels. It's called Watsonian versus Doyleist explanation. It refers to the explanation of the events from the books from two different perspectives. One is from the character perspective, I mean the innermost perspective, and the second is the perspective of the author. In this case, one is from the perspective of Dr. Watson, the character from the Sherlock Holmes novels, and the other explanation is from Doyle himself. Some spoilers to Sherlock Holmes ahead to give you an example. How did Sherlock Holmes survive the fight with Moriarty? Watson would say something like Sherlock forced Moriarty to fall. I do not remember the actual explanation, so I'd rather not mention it here. But then you'd ask Doyle the same question, and his answer would be, my entire audience pressured me to bring Sherlock Holmes back. Basically, in this case, Doyle is Paul Sheldon, and his entire audience is Annie Wilkes. Here's why this Watsonian versus Doyleist cliché is relevant here, and this correlates to my beliefs regarding the certain aspect of the show. In the show, there's this guy called Halbrand, so lots of viewers looked at him and caught an interesting resemblance in the eyes, in the facial expression, and the overall demeanor. Does this guy remind you of anyone? I'm sure we have seen him somewhere before. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, you got that right. This guy, Halbrand, this guy really looks like Aragorn. Why is Halbrand so Aragorn-like? This question is where the whole Watsonian versus Doyleist explanation arises. Watsonian answer: Halbrand is total opposite of Aragorn. Sure, they're both resistant to being kings, and they both appear reserved, and people do not know who they are when they first meet these two characters. But their paths are totally different, and the visuals are only meant to represent this. Or something like that, yeah, definitely. And now here comes the Doyleist answer. Everybody loved Viggo Mortensen while watching the Peter Jackson trilogy, so we needed someone like him to carry the show. How else would you get people to watch the show? I firmly believe the Doyleist answer here. Convince me otherwise. Seriously, try to do it. Explain to me that he wasn't hired to be an Aragorn copy. It did not save the show though. Actually, in many ways, the show does copy the Peter Jackson films. The show simply cannot let go of them, and there are certain scenes that are definitely a cheap copy of the trilogy. Nothing against the Halbrand actor here. He definitely tried his best. I found an interview with him, and while reading the interview, I learned that this guy actually had huge respect for Tolkien's novels, just like Viggo, definitely. Not a bad actor per se, it's just that he was hired to play a cheap copy of Aragorn. Speaking of cheap copies, let's make an interesting parallel here. Imagine that you discovered a band. Let's call it Fire. Everything about the band is a top tier. The vocals, the drumming, the guitars, etc. And the members are charismatic too. You become a huge fan of theirs. This band means the world for you. You listen to them on a daily basis, and that goes on for years. Now imagine that you came across a band called Candle, who resembles Fire a little bit. Sure, Candle seems like a nice band and everything. However, once you listen to the band, you realize that the Candle does not have the charm, the energy, the magic, and everything that Fire had. They are not on the same level at all. Candle seems almost bland and subordinate in comparison to Fire. Sure, you listen to Candle for a while, not a bad band, and eventually you go back to listening to Fire. I think you know what I tried to do here. I think you got the point. And yeah, speaking of bands, now, after listening to a lot of metal bands, I think I know one of the reasons behind Mortensen's appeal. He kinda looks like a rock star that really resembles somebody who could be in a heavy metal band. Oh, just look how metal bands have completely altered my perception of anything related to Tolkien. Cannot read his books properly anymore. Something in the books will always remind me of metal bands. And now this has gone beyond books too. By the way, I do recommend checking out my connection between fantasy and heavy metal video, and also the video regarding the 7 favorite Tolkien themed songs of mine. Yeah, I know that I am also the person who made this. I know that I also made this video, but still. And so my rant is coming to an end. In short, I really hope that in the future we are going to see some great adaptations of Tolkien stories that can stand on their own, with right people in charge and solid actors who are their own being, who bring something to the character they play, and who are not a copy of others. I know that the chances this would happen are low, but I still wanted to rant about it anyway. What do you think? Do you really want to see a 2-part Gollum movie or some other adaptation? Or maybe you think Middle-earth should be left alone for good? Not a bad point, actually. I wouldn't mind. Actually, great point. Either way, the new adaptations should not try to recapture the magic of the original trilogy or bandwagon it. Bandwagon, kinda hard for me to pronounce that word. Instead, said adaptations should create magic of their own. I know for sure that if I want to recapture the magic of the original Lord of the Rings, I would watch the original Lord of the Rings. I'm sure that's the same for you and for a lot of people too. People will definitely rewatch these movies. These are the movies for all ages. They were wonderfully made and they are very comforting. And that's all. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed my ranting. See you in my next video. Goodbye.